Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala program in Linguistics. I am Professor Ravinder Gargesh from the Department of Linguistics, University of Delhi. Today we will discuss linguistic stylistics. The module in linguistic stylistics is Introduction to Figurative Language. So far, we have seen style features which are phonological in nature, style features which are lexical in nature, style features which are syntactic in nature. But there is an area which generally grammar avoids, that is the area of figurative language. So this is an introduction to figurative language, and in this module we will look at what is figurative language, what are the figures of speech in non-literary discourse, and function of figurative language in general. The main objective of the module is to help you to understand the difference between figurative language and literal language, and to learn to appreciate the role of figures of speech in literary and non-literary discourses. Remember our discussions on Russian formalism and Prague School, defamiliarization and foregrounding. This is of course foregrounding taking place, but in a different way. Let's look at another perspective of the same thing. Now in this module, the concept of figurative language. What is figurative language? And what is meant by the figures of speech at different levels of linguistic structure in literary and non-literary discourse. Figurative language occurs in both literary and non-literary discourse, and it is important in both. Figurative language is broadly defined as language that uses words or expressions deviating from their original basic meaning, in contrast to literal language, which maintains a consistent meaning regardless of the context. Figurative language or non-literal language uses words and expressions in their non-literal meaning, which depend on the context in which they are used. To understand what figurative language means, let us take a very simple example. The rat was caught in a trap. Second, the highwayman was caught in his own trap. So we have the noun trap in two expressions. The rat was caught in a trap. The highwayman was caught in his own trap. An average speaker of English will have no difficulty in understanding the difference between the two traps. In the rat was caught in a trap, trap refers to connivance and snaring of an animal, a device to capture an animal. In the second one, the highwayman was caught in his own trap. The highwayman's trap can only be robbery, a plan for robbery. It is not some gadget to catch somebody. It's a robbery plan. So in the first one, the trap is used literally. In the second one, it is a case of non-literal use, figurative use of the language. But the similarity between the two traps is apparent. Trap in the first line is a concrete object, and it is an abstract idea in the second expression that we used. Now, how is this semantic change from a concrete object to an abstract idea perceived at the cognitive level? Since trap acquired an added meaning a long time back, it has become formalized as literal meaning. Let us look at another example. Let's exploit an example of figurative usage. The country is groaning under the weight of a huge population. The country is groaning. Can a country groan? The literal meaning does not make sense, as groaning, which means making deep, inarticulate sounds in pain, is a peculiarity of human attributes. But the country is not human. It could only have a human subject. Therefore, to make sense of this sentence, we will have to modify the meaning of country to include features of plus human, so that this country cannot add features of plus human, so that this country can feel pain and groan as it is pressed by a massive population, which it cannot sustain. So when we assign a meaning other than its literal meaning to an expression in a given context, we are giving it a figurative meaning. So here we have given a figurative meaning, country groaning. An expression is said to be used figuratively when its literal meaning contradicts our knowledge of the world. Let's take another sentence. Oh my love's like a red, red rose. Now here, the preposition like invites us to transfer some of the properties of rose to love. My love's. Now second example, oh my love's like a red, red rose. Here, the preposition like invites us to transfer some of the properties of rose to love and give it a new meaning. Love, an abstract idea, becomes like rose, an object of freshness and beauty. Deviation, that's a semantic change, takes a different form in different figures. In metaphoric, in the first sentence, oh my love's like a red, red rose. Here the preposition like invites us to transfer some of the properties of rose to love and give it a new meaning. Love, an abstract idea, becomes like rose, an object of freshness and beauty. This is deviation. So deviation, that is semantic change, takes a different form in different figures. In metaphors and similes, the earlier example was a simile. My love's like a red, red rose. There is a simile. So the features are added. They allow one thing to be seen as another. So see the similarity between two things and also their difference. Now this is figurative. Let us look at another example. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. You know from phonological analysis that this is alliteration. But then this is also symbolic. Here the sound f, the fair breeze flew, the white foam flew, furrow free, furrow followed free. So in addition, the example exhibits extra regularity called parallelism. 3 successive clauses are in the past indefinite tense. Now let us look at some more examples. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. This is an example of alliteration. Here the sound f in word initial position occurs in successive words. Foam flew, furrow followed free. And in addition to this, all the examples exhibit extra regularity, parallelism. 3 successive clauses are in the past tense, past indefinite tense. Let us look at another example. Never let a fool kiss you, or a kiss fool you. So there is a reversal. Never let a fool kiss you, or a kiss fool you. Fool kiss, kiss fool. This is chiasmus. Here verbal pattern in the second half of the expression is balanced against the first with the parts reversed. Fool kiss you becomes kiss fool you. Take another example. In the night sky shimmered the moon. In the night sky shimmered the moon. Here we have deviation from normal arrangement of words. In classical rhetoric figures of speech resulting from deviation from literal statement were called tropes, while those characterized by deviation from normal arrangement of words were called schemes. Tropes, meaning interchange, are supposed to be figures of lexical substitution, and schemes, figures of grammatical patterns which might involve repetition as in alliteration or extra regularity as in parallelism of the 3 clauses of syntax. They can be characterized by syntactic deviation. Syntactic deviation like in the night sky shimmered the white moon. It should be the white moon shimmered in the night sky. So there is definitely deviation. So tropes deal with meanings of words while schemes deal with word order, syntax, letters and sounds. While the division is still valid, current dictionaries of literary terms generally avoid such classification. We can now define figurative language or figure of speech comprehensively as intentional deviation. Intentional deviation from literal statement or normal arrangement of words and language. It has, however, to be noted that in a figurative sign, there is never complete substitution of one sign by another. The usual signifier-signified relationship is disrupted, but as we can see in one of the examples above, the signified is not completely detached from the signifier. It is only modified. Country assimilates human features so that it becomes sensitive and it can begin to feel pain. It can groan. Yet it does not lose its identity as a huge landmass. A speaker says S is P, but means figuratively S is R. R is a modified version of S that has assimilated some features of P. And similarly, the country is modified after being put in succession with, given the verb grown. The country groaned. So the country is now modified. But how do we decide what features of P will be assimilated by R? The limits of deviation, that is, the extent of modification, are defined by the context of utterance. The context is very important. We cannot interpret in any far-fetched manner. Here is another example. You have entertained us long enough. Ordinarily, what would this sentence mean? That you have entertained us long enough. But this is, if we look at the context in which it was uttered, it is irony. This is an instance of verbal irony or sarcasm, which is meant to hurt or insult indirectly. Long enough has a negative connotation, and it is incompatible with entertained. Entertained long enough is very negative. Entertained takes a 180 degrees U-turn, so to say, and become bored. So it is not entertaining, it has become bored. In irony, semantic deviation takes the form of, in irony, semantic deviation takes the form of opposite meaning. Irony achieves its meaning through understatement, concealment of allusion, and so may often require, apart from the context of the utterance, discourse context to be interpreted. In the line just cited, this is from Pride and Prejudice. And Mr. Bennet is getting increasingly uncomfortable with the terrible bad singing of his daughter Mary at a party, and he wants her to stop. That's why he said, you have entertained us long enough. Hyperbole and paradox. Hyperbole, exaggeration, and paradox, which is identified by apparent contradiction. These are also figurative forms. They also need to be interpreted in terms of context of utterance. For example, my grandmother is as old as the hills. This is a hyperbole. Take another sentence. I can resist anything but temptation. This is a paradox. Now in the my grandmother is as old as the hills, this is a hyperbole. And I can resist anything but temptation is paradox. In both these statements, literal meaning contradicts our knowledge of the world. In order that the two statements make sense, we give a different meaning for them in the background of the context of utterance. In the first expression regarding grandmother being as old as hills, this is perceived as exaggeration of the age of grandmother. And in the other expression, we have an apparently self-contradictory statement. And in order to make sense of it, we interpret it as a witty way of saying, you cannot resist temptation. So we will be looking at various ways in which deviation works in different figures of speech, and some more of examples will follow. Recent researches do seem to suggest that figurative language is comprehended at the same time as literal language. And so the premise that the recipient was the first attempting to process a literal meaning and discarding it before attempting to process a figurative meaning appears to be false. They both are perceived simultaneously, of course in the same expression. While it may be true in case of frozen figures of figures and many other simpler figurative usages, figures of speech such as poetic metaphors that create complex images and symbols do require conscious effort on the part of the reader to analyze and interpret them. So we will discuss this in other modules that will follow. To sum up, figurative language is a deviant use of language, and this deviation can work on both paradigmatic and syntagmatic levels. Paradigmatic figures, that is figures of meaning, can manifest themselves either through linguistic deviation such as metaphor and simile, or contextual such as metonymy and hyperbole, or both. Figurative usage is deviant only in the sense that literal meaning fails to interpret an utterance. But our human communication system allows words to acquire new or additional meanings. Semantic changes often add meanings to the language without subtracting any. In non-literal, that is figurative language, a sign acquires an additional meaning by its relationship with another sign through similarity, dissimilarity, contradiction, association, etc. The specific nature of change in meaning is governed by socio-cultural code of interpretation that the hearer-reader applies to the utterance. Let us take another example. Holy cow, that car almost ran into us. Another example, why should the MPs consider themselves as holy cows of the system and seek exemption from odd-even traffic rule? This is a reference from India. The first one is elsewhere, holy cow, that car almost ran into us. The second example from India, why should member parliaments consider themselves as holy cows of the system and seek exemption from odd-even traffic rule? In the first expression, holy cow would probably be interpreted as an exclamation expressing surprise or excitement by native speakers of English, maybe in USA, maybe in England, for whom it is euphemism for Holy Christ. So Holy Christ, Holy Cow, something similar. But in Indian English, it has altogether different connotation. The member parliaments as holy cows is a metaphor for being as sacred and worthy of love and respect as the cows in Hindu religion. In contrast to such figures of meaning called tropes, there is another class of figures called the schemes or syntagmatic figures. In contrast to such figures of meaning called tropes, there is another class of figures called the schemes or syntagmatic figures, which are characterized by repetition of extra regularity and sometimes deviation from the normal arrangement of signs in a linguistic structure. Their focus is not on meaning but on form of the message. Figures are not merely stylistic devices used to lend beauty and grace to poetry, though they do that too. But in ordinary discourse and in poetic discourse, they have a significant function or to perform. They often say something through vivid pictures that implant themselves on the speaker's reader's mind more easily than any description in literal language will. Now, figure of speech in non-literary discourse. Though figurative usage is more characteristic of literature, especially poetry, it is not exclusive to it. Ordinary discourse, especially political discourse and commercial publicity material, make big use of figures of speech. Political speeches, being high on rhetoric, are peppered with metaphors, puns, metonymies, and parallelisms. A couple of examples. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny. Jawaharlal Nehru. We made a tryst with destiny. A metaphor. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Kiasbas, having a metaphorical function. Drinking and driving don't mix. Metaphorical. Fill your lungs with life, not cigarettes. Metonymy. So there are so many expressions in everyday life which are metaphorical, which are figurative in nature, and they are used very, very often. Some novel figures we have already taken. So what is the function of figurative language? Are figures merely stylistic devices used to lend beauty and grace to poetry or to language in general? Of course, they serve a rhetorical function of illustrating and amplifying an idea or giving force to an argument in religious, political, and philosophical discourse. This is reference to common language. Even in scientific discourse, metaphors can sometimes be used to serve as models to illustrate a problem. Comic and satiric speech must inevitably use pun, irony, hyperbole. Jokes and riddles would not be possible without the use of metaphor, pun, and paradox. All these are figurative parts of figurative language. A poet primarily uses figurative language to force readers to imagine what they mean with an expression or statement. Multiple literary devices and elements are commonly used in the category of figurative language. A figure of speech compels the reader to see an object, event, idea through the eyes of the poet or writer. Consider We take a last example. Consider Lady Macbeth's soliloquy in the play Macbeth. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Here, hyperbole becomes a verbal icon of Lady Macbeth's realization of the enormity of her crime and her sense of guilt. So we would like to conclude. So let us briefly sum up what you are expected to know from this module. First of all, what is figurative language? That figurative language is a deviant use of language, and this deviation can work on both paradigmatic and syntagmatic levels. Paradigmatic figures of meaning can manifest themselves either through linguistic deviation such as metaphor or simile, or contextuals. The contextual figures are metonymy and hyperbole. Figurative usage is deviant only in the sense that literal meaning fails to interpret an utterance. But our human communication system allows words to acquire new or additional meanings. Semantic changes often add meanings to the language without subtracting any non-literal, that is figurative language. A sign acquires an additional meaning by its relationship with another sign through similarity, dissimilarity, contradiction, association, etc. The specific nature of change in meaning is governed by socio-cultural code of interpretation that is governed by the hearer-reader own worldview, and this applies to the utterance.